I'm getting blind soon, okay? A couple weeks. So until then, just pretend that there are blinds there instead of a painting, and I don't even know what that is. And also just, well, it's also, this room is a complete mess. Today we're going to be responding to a PragerU video. I've had this one linked to me the most out of any video ever, so I kind of had to do it. I watched it and I was like, don't want to do this. And then I had like 3 more people say to me, oh my god, you have to respond to this. And I was just like, well no, I guess I have to respond to this, quite literally. So it's just like, yeah, I'm meaning to do this for a while. Now that my exam's out of the way, I can finally put myself through that pain. So, without further ado, let's do this. Now, for anybody not too familiar with PragerU's videos, you just know that when you see this fucker right here, shit's gonna get bad.
When people describe particularly evil individuals or regimes, why is it that they use the terms Nazi or fascist, but almost never communist?
They do. What? They do.
Given the unparalleled amount of human suffering communists have caused, why is communist so much less a term of revulsion than Nazi? Communists killed 70 million people in China, more than 20 million people in the Soviet Union.
I never really understood why literally every single death that happens under communism is considered to be a fault of communism, right? Because capitalism, people just, when deaths do happen under capitalism, people just say, oh, well, that's just the way life is, or they do think up of reasons and excuses as to why that happened. I mean, the Irish potato famine, people don't point to that and go, this is evidence that capitalism cannot properly distribute resources, right? It's because of the propaganda being given to you, so you're not holding these two systems up to the same standards, right? So you don't think that under the Soviet Union there may have been specific reasons, maybe inherent to any ideology, as to why there were famines. And furthermore, it's like, oftentimes capitalism isn't even full of a system to be held up to any standards in the first place. It's ridiculous how people will have these mental gymnastics to completely remove capitalism from reality and just say, oh, well, capitalism is just free exchange. So any famines that happen under a Western government aren't really capitalism because it's not related to free exchange. And if I just reduce capitalism down to this completely useless definition that actually has no basis in reality and can't describe anything, then capitalism is okay. But of course you'll be an idiot while doing it. And you know another fucking thing I never really understood about the right? I've kind of always admired, almost, their ability to kind of see through a lot of bullshit that's given to them by the media and by the government. You know, it's impressive, really. That is something I think that the right are really good, and they're very critical of the mainstream media, and they don't take at face value almost anything given to them by the establishment. Good on them. Then it comes to communism, and they will take literally any bullshit that is presented to them at face value, and they don't bother to look into it anymore, and you are considered absolutely mad if you try and say otherwise about this stuff. Why is it that they're so critical of everything but communism, when obviously even they have to admit that it's in the Western establishment's interest to tell lies about communism, right? Unless they're the really far gone ones who think Western establishment is communism, but those people are just not even worth talking to.
In not including about 5 million Ukrainians.
Let's be real though, the kulaks deserved it, I mean.
And almost 1 out of every 3 Cambodians. And communists enslaved entire nations in Russia, Vietnam, China, Eastern Europe, North Korea, Cuba, and much of Central Asia.
Communism enslaved entire nations. I love that claim. What the actual fuck is your definition of slavery? Living under a country? Is that it? I mean, you know, literally the only excuse I can think of for people enslaved under these fucking countries is because at some points they were forced to work, okay? Fair enough. But hey, guess what you're forced to do under capitalism, Dennis? Fucking guess.
They ruined the lives of well over 1 billion people.
Ruined the lives of well over 1 billion people. You're doing the same thing. You're just saying because they lived under communism, they automatically had their lives ruined. Yet you ignore the industrialization, the raise in living standards, the raise in literacy rates and education. You're gonna have to be more specific on how these people's lives were ruined, Dennis.
So why doesn't communism have the same terrible reputation as Nazism? Reason number 1, There is, simply put, widespread ignorance of the communist record.
What was the Cold War? What? Ignorance? You're taught this shit in fucking primary school. Literally everybody knows about it. How are you this deluded?
Whereas both right and left loathe Nazism and teach its evil history, the left, and I'm talking about the left, not traditional liberals, like Harry Truman or John F. Kennedy, has never loathed communism.
You know, we can flip this on its head. The right, and I mean the right, not traditional Republicans, never loathed fascism.
And since the left dominates academia, almost no one teaches communism's evil history.
Yes, they fucking do, though, throughout education. You know, secondary school and primary school, this shit is shoved down your throat from a very young age. And then maybe less so to an extent at universities, where they might be willing to have a more nuanced view about things, which might be why they're a little more sympathetic to communism, just throwing that one out there. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean universities are just some kind of, you know, collective orgy of leftist circle jerking. It's like, liberals, okay, but actual communism? No, of course there are communists and Marxists there, but there seems to be this narrative in some people's head on the right that literally everybody reads Lenin and Marx all day. And if that were true, I'd fucking love that. I really would, but it's just not reality.
Reason number 2, the Nazis carried out the Holocaust.
I don't really have anything to say on reason number 2, so we're skipping to reason number 3.
Reason number 3, communism is based on nice-sounding theories. Nazism isn't. It's based on heinous-sounding theories.
You see, this is actually a very, very dangerous way of viewing fascism and Nazism, okay? The idea that fascism automatically from the get-go is calling for the extermination of minorities, for white supremacy, all of that stuff is just not based in reality. And when we look at both history and today with people like Richard Spencer, it's just not what happens. So assume that it's only fascism when it is on the face of it extremely disgusting. You know, how do you think these ideas gain popularity in the first place? You know, there's actually a really good poem written by Michael Rosen, believe it or not. If you guys know him from the memes, I'm sure. But we'll read it out because it gets my point across perfectly. I sometimes fear that people think fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesques and monsters, as played out in endless reruns of the Nazis. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honor, make you feel proud, protect your house, give you a job. Clean up the neighborhood, remind you how great you once were. Clear out the venal and the corrupt, and remove anything you feel was unlike you. It doesn't walk in saying, our program means militias, mass imprisonments, transportations, war, and persecution. So therein lies, really, the main way that fascism can get its foot in the door. When people make fascism out to be this completely out there fringe thing that could never gain popularity today because it's just so obviously wrong, that's when it kind of takes that opportunity to disguise itself almost, to seem something actually relatively more reasonable, and then obviously over time, you know, reveals its true colours, as it were. I mean, it was called the final solution for a reason. They'd never really intended from the get-go to exterminate all the Jews, but in order to achieve an ethno state, that's just what you have to do, and history has shown that. So whether or not they don't intend to do that from the first place, if their ultimate goal is an ethno state, that's what they'll do to get it. But I'm talking about intents and stuff here. Most of the people pushing this bullshit to the uninitiated, as it were, do actually know it's probably going to end up like that. They just don't care, because obviously those people have just lost any sense of remorse for those minorities. They're just trying to convince other people so they can slowly introduce them to the more radical ideas. You see, in that sense, it's kind of like what a lot of Nazis think cultural Marxism is, but Marxism just says it's from the get-go, we're going to violently overthrow capitalism and institute a worker state, but I'm getting off topic.
Intellectuals in general, including, of course, the intellectuals who write history, are seduced by words. So much so that they deem actions as less significant than words. For that reason, they haven't focused nearly as much attention on the horrific actions of communists as they have on the horrific actions of the Nazis.
These intellectuals are just so dumb that they get tricked by communist theories. I mean, it's almost like if intellectuals keep getting perpetually drawn to communist ideas, and these people are by definition intellectual, there might be something. I mean, side note for a second, I love how the right have, like, unknowingly made intellectuals a derogatory term. It's just... Oh.
They dismiss the evils of communists as perversions of true communism, but they regard Nazi atrocities, correctly, as the logical and inevitable results of Nazism.
Yeah, what I don't get is how he then doesn't explain why that line of thinking is actually wrong and why it isn't a perversion of true communism. I mean, this whole thing of saying it's not true communism these days to a lot of people just seems to be a self-defeating argument in itself. Because apparently if arguments are repeated loads and loads of times, that means they're wrong somehow.
Reason number 4. Germans have thoroughly exposed the evils of Nazism, have taken responsibility for them, and have attempted to atone for them. Russians have not done anything similar regarding Lenin's or Stalin's horrors. To the contrary, Lenin, the father of Soviet communism, is still widely venerated in Russia.
That's because Lenin and Stalin turned Russia into a fucking superpower. Okay, they went from a third world backwater shitfest to literally the second most powerful country in the world. I mean, I really don't understand how you're not putting 2 and 2 together when you talk about how people who live outside Western propaganda still like, to some degree, Stalin and Lenin. I mean, I'll spell it out if I have to. It's because propaganda is full of fucking lies. And when people grow up without these lies, and they take a more nuanced view of the whole thing without having this propaganda shoved down their throats, they actually turn out to quite like these figures a bit more than we do. But lastly though, the USSR only collapsed because of its own internal problems, and quite recently at that. Nazi Germany, on the other hand, was forcibly crushed by war and therefore forced to denounce Nazism, and I'm glad that that did happen, but it's nonetheless a difference between the USSR and Nazi Germany that needs to be highlighted here. And that's why that Germany renounces still Nazism, while Russia is a little less lax on renouncing communism.
And as regards Stalin, as University of London Russian historian Donald Rayfield puts it, quote, "People still deny, by assertion or implication, Stalin's Holocaust," unquote.
You know there's a reason for that, right?
Even less so as China exposed the greatest mass murderer and enslaver of them all, Mao Zedong.
Well, I mean, China still call themselves communists, so I mean, I don't really know what you expect there.
Reason number 5. Communists murdered mostly their own people. The Nazis, on the other hand, killed very few fellow Germans. World opinion, that largely meaningless and amoral term, deems the murder of members of one's own group far less noteworthy than the murder of outsiders.
Where are you getting this from? Because honestly, you just seem to be making up now. I've never heard of this before.
That's why, for example, blacks killing millions of fellow blacks in Africa elicits almost no attention from world opinion.
Well, it's likely just because everyone's content and used to Africa being completely fucked. So, you know, crime and poverty happening in Africa, that's no shock to anybody. But similar things happening in a first world country, well, that's out of the ordinary. People are obviously going to take more notice to it. It's not because it's Africans on Africans. I mean, Africa's fucking huge, you know. Like, just to say. Don't worry, I was about to go on a whole nother rant there, but it doesn't matter.
And reason number 6. In the view of the left, the last good war was World War II, the war against German Nazism and Japanese fascism.
Jesus Christ. I really hope you're not going to do this, but are you seriously about to tell me that Vietnam was a just war?
The left does not regard wars against communist regimes as good wars. For example, the American war against Vietnamese communism is regarded as immoral.
Because America committed absolute atrocities in Vietnam. I mean, you go on and on about having to hold communists accountable for the crimes that they've committed against humanity, yet you seem to not only ignore but almost rewrite history to completely remove anything that the West and US imperialism has done. And honestly, that's just beyond scum.
Until the left and all the institutions influenced by the left acknowledge how evil communism has been, we will continue to live in a morally confused world.
Again, it is very, very much considered to be evil by the vast majority of society still, because Cold War propaganda still has that lasting effect in people. Okay? I don't see how you have it in your head that people don't regard communism as evil. You are, I would say, deluded, but it's much more likely that you're just going for some kind of rage factor from your audience to rack up those views and make sure that they know that they're the victims and that everybody else secretly loved communism this whole fucking time. But no, it's just not how the world is.
Even worse than being murdered or enslaved is a world that doesn't even know that you were.
And funnily enough, that's one of the most elegant attacks against capitalism I've ever heard. Now honestly, after watching that, I almost feel sick. I mean, it's one thing to repeat that old mantra of communism has killed 100 billion people. I'm used to that, but to then go that step further and just blatantly ignore, or like I've said again, rewrite history to put these Western atrocities in good positive lights, and have people now walk away from this video thinking that wars like the Vietnam War, one of the most horrific exercises of military power against peaceful citizens, was a just war just because it was done against alleged communists. It really saddens me, honestly. Yeah. But let's try not and end this on a too much of a negative note, shall we? Look, at the very least, we can take comfort that by this point, PragerU are almost definitely grasping at straws, because I think I'd say, and I think people would agree, that there's been a rise, a surge almost, in left-wing politics recently online. I think we're moving away from the social justice versus skeptic debate kind of thing, and before that it was skeptics versus religion. We're moving away from that, and we're going towards, I think, the next one, which is going to be the far left versus reactionaries. And I'm telling you now, it will be our chance to shine. And the more videos I see like this from PragerU and other people, the more I know we're gaining popularity, we're gaining ground. And look, all it takes for communism is to just get our ideas out there, because they make sense. When you actually pierce through the blatant propaganda that people were told, the blatant misinformation and the blatant misunderstanding, you get the core ideas themselves, people take to them. They historically always have. And I know that when we have the platform, as we are growing now, to spread those ideas, people will take to them. So let's just take comfort in that. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.